Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network. We make our way through the A24 filmography and along the way bring you interviews with the talent involved. In this episode we review Causeway, starring Jennifer Lawrence and streaming now on Apple TV+. So Dallas, we finally come round to Causeway. This is a film that we highlighted on A24 Hour News quite a few years ago and finally has arrived. I think people for quite a long time were asking, where's this kind of film?
Yeah, no, it was. I think it was at that point. I think it was heralded as J-Law, Jennifer Lawrence's return to the big screen. But sort of in that time, sort of Don't Look Up, sort of squeezed in there before this one came out, and I think it's gone through a couple of iterations. I believe it was originally called, was it Red, White, and Water, before they settled on Causeway. So, but yeah, no. An exciting film to come back with. J Law is an Oscar darling. I think everyone loves her as an actress and as a person and a celebrity. She's always good on the circuits and stuff like that. So I think they were excited to see her return to something potentially more akin to her sort of breakout role with sort of Winter's Bone and stuff like that than the sort of David O. Russells and sort of Don't Look Ups that we've had recently. So, and of course her brief foray into the world of blockbuster filmmaking. You know, we've always got to do one for them and one for us, haven't they? So, you know, with our Hunger Games and the maybe the less said about the X-Men films, the better.
Definitely. So before we dive into that, I think we should kind of dive into A24 Hour News, or as I'm want to rebrand it now, After Sun Oscar Potential. So Charlotte Wells' directorial debut, After Sun, took home the most awards of any sort of nominated film at the 25th Annual British Independent Film Awards at the weekend, nabbing 7 victories out of 16. And of those 7, it was Best British Independent Film, Best Screenplay, Best Director, Best Debut Director, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, Best Musical Supervision. So, Dallas, you have been championing this for a long time that it might break into the Oscars. Do you think this is kind of one of these films where it's kind of preaching to the converted but it's not going to break the Oscars, or is this actually a sign of success on the way?
As much as I'd like it to, I don't think that the Biffers will convert any sort of potential Oscar goes. I mean, it certainly strengthens its case towards the BAFTAs early next year. There was some curious awards sort of given that night. I found it interesting that Charlotte Wells didn't win Best Debut Screenplay, yet won Best Screenplay. That was an odd one, but I guess they were trying to spread the love, and we did see sadly Paul and Frankie miss out on Best Joint Lead Performance, which is a new category for BIFA this year. But they certainly entertained us during one of the acceptance speeches. Anyway, and I will have to go and see The Silent Twins, which beat them out for that award. I'll probably try and catch that this weekend. I mean, it's certainly getting, I think it's doing very well in sort of, you know, the sort of debut film, sort of first feature sort of awards and stuff like that. Whether or not it can break through, I think there's potential. I think in my article for Next Best Picture, I highlighted, I think it was Paul Mescal as Best Actor and then Best Screenplay for Charlotte Wells, where it's 2 best options. As much as I would love it to personally, I don't think it will be able to break through to the sort of potentially top 10 best film nominees at the Oscars. But I think Screenplay and actors still remain its best course of action, and we'll have to see how A24 play the next couple of months. I mean, it looks like, given the recent Gotham Awards and stuff like that, that Ke Huy Quan for Everything Everywhere All at Once has it sewn up. Michelle Yeoh is probably sort of second favourite behind Cate Blanchett at the moment for Best Actress. Everything Everywhere All at Once won Best Film at the Gotham Awards. So, and there's still lots to play for. Although I guess we'll get into one of the other big potential nominees on the next episode of the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in this one, we're going to kind of dive into Causeway. So, for those not familiar with it or haven't had the chance to stream it yet on Apple TV Plus, Lindsay, a US soldier played by Jennifer Lawrence, experiences a traumatic brain injury during her tour in Afghanistan, which forces her to return home. She struggles to return to her daily life with her mother as she waits for her eventual redeployment. So, Dallas, what was your reaction to Causeway? Because you've had a kind of few weeks of some of the buzz surrounding this film in terms of potential Oscar nominations and sort of reactions. What did you kind of think of this film, and what were you kind of expecting going in?
Well, I mean, I'd sort of stayed away from the reviews and even the trailer. I hadn't watched anything of it. I think the only thing I'd seen was there was a heavily promoted Twitter advert, which was basically sort of highlighting the two lead performances from Jennifer Lawrence and Brian Tyree Henry. So I sort of went in, as I always do, with a nice open mind. And I mean, I think it's fair to say that it's probably not the film that I was expecting. And I potentially mean that actually in actually a surprisingly good way. With a sort of film like this where someone is playing someone who is recovering from an injury, and especially a brain injury, I was slightly worried going in on how that was going to be portrayed on screen, and I was really actually delighted to see that it was, I guess, slightly potentially underplayed by Jennifer Lawrence. There wasn't the sort of theatrics around sort of potentially giving the character any sort of physical impairment. There was some to begin with as she was readjusting to life. She had some sort of hand-eye sort of body motor problems with trying to get things to match up from her head to her body and stuff like that, and you could see the sort of frustration building. But what I liked is there was a lot of internal angst to it, and where some people in the past, if they were given a role like this, would have gone over the top with it. She played a lot of it internally, where the battle is in her mind for her own body and stuff like that, and you can still see that playing out sort of on her face and stuff like that, but there wasn't the physical theatrics to it, which I really did appreciate with something like this, because it could have gone an entirely different way, and that kind of performance is the type of performance which somebody does in order to win an Oscar. I mean, I think she's being sort of touted as, yeah, it's another great performance for her. She's not really being talked in the mix at the moment, but I think purely on her personality and stuff like that, she could become a contender later down the line, depending on how things go. But I was pleasantly surprised with how this, and obviously the director Leo Nuremberger decided to go down the route that they did with it.
Yeah, I must admit I was surprised as well. I caught this one opening night on Apple TV Plus.
Opening night on Apple TV. Yeah.
I'd missed this one at the London Film Festival just due to timing, so I'd been kind of looking forward to it because it felt like, oh, we're finally getting this film that Dallas told me about in our A24 hour roundup a couple of years ago. So yeah, I was kind of curious to see this one because it was coming in at that stage, and even after the festival run, as slightly understated of people would be kind of saying, oh yeah, it was a good film, and perhaps more people were caught up in things like the whale discussion and other such things, whereas this one was just sort of coming out of people going, yeah, I enjoyed that, and kind of moving on. And obviously there's been a little bit of awards kind of buzz, but that's really been more obviously for Brian Tyree Henry. But I think in those first few minutes I thought to myself, oh, I have a sneaky feeling that this is going to be very much a film that is kind of very much focused on sort of this person's misery and sort of, overcoming this physical hardship, which is important representation, but has been done to death. When you start to hear about maybe films are going to be, award worthy, you're sort of thinking, oh, I know where this is going. Yeah, I've seen this all before. But I think really for me, it was this relationship between the two and how understated it was that really stood out for me, that they both come from this place of trauma, really, but from different backgrounds. And again, another thing where we're like, oh, here we go, it's the broken people, and they find each other, and then they learn to love again, they learn to live again because they've fallen in love. But that wasn't what it went to whatsoever. It sort of let that dynamic between the two never strayed into that sort of cliche romance or relationships. It felt very, very authentic.
Apart from one tiny moment in the pool where you did wonder where it was going to go. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's one of the strengths of it. Like you say, it's a very understated film, but I really sort of appreciated that about it, that it didn't go down like another sort of, I guess, maybe sort of all of a sudden Born on the 4th of July type of thing. And it was less about, the injuries and stuff like that, and it was more about, like you say, two physically broken but also mentally broken people finding a companion to guide them through the dark place that they're both in and come out better people on the other side. And I like, just like you sort of said, I appreciate that they avoided the romantic angle. It would have been so easy to do that, and I'm so glad that they didn't. And I actually kind of appreciated the way that it was kind of almost shut down by Jennifer Lawrence, and that she's, these two are just sort of having a beer at the end of the night, and some guy tries to hit up on her, and then Brian Tyree just pretend, she's my girl and whatever, just to diffuse the situation with the guy, and then afterwards she basically says, I don't go for any guys, and then you're like, oh right, okay. And then, so that, I think it was a really nice way to shut down, of course. But then, there is a moment between the two of them, which is probably one of the sort of best scenes in the film. Actually, is when almost the Band-Aid is almost sort of ripped off between them. They've kind of been skirting around issues, both individually and between the two of them. They've sort of told, not lies, but they've been deliberately vague, shall we say, in revealing aspects of both of their individual traumas and family lives, and that leads to this sort of big moment where potentially the whole thing could fracture again, and they would, every sort of moment of progress that they've managed to build up throughout this movie could come shattering down. But I really sort of like the way that was handled and played out. And yeah, you can see certainly in that scene, in the pool particularly, that's where a lot of the buzz, I think, is coming for Brian Tyree, and who, is being talked about Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars. However, I truly believe that he should have been nominated several years ago for his one scene in If Beale Street Could Talk, because I thought he was absolutely fabulous in that movie as well. But why didn't he get nominated for Oppenheimer / The Eternals and for Fastos? Who knows? Who knows?
I think what's interesting about this is that sort of both of them kind of, as we've spoken about, sort of that trauma, and I found it quite difficult to watch, but in that kind of genuinely gripping way of a drama of like sort of Lindsay constantly trying to push to get back into the army, because it felt very uncomfortable for almost watching this sort of doctor kind of constantly put into this position of like essentially kind of signing a death warrant really for her to return back to kind of Afghanistan. And yeah, I found that quite difficult to watch, and just sort of this idea that, that if she goes back, that, the trouble that she's going to find herself in, and, that you find sort of like, I think it's later on in the film, like it all sort of begins coming together. We sort of meet her brother Justin, who's in prison, and sort of like, the idea that for both of them, they are both happy in sort of their own metaphorical and literal prisons that they're kind of putting in, that he's happy in this kind of prison and feels content being in there. And you hear the same for the army almost, that so many people, that's where they naturally gravitate towards is the army, that discipline, that regiment, that every day is very much the same in terms of meal times and so on. And it was almost interesting to kind of see that. And then very much the same with James too, that his life and sort of where he wants to go. And yeah, I found that very difficult to watch because you're almost screaming, don't let her go back, don't let her go back. And we certainly see how much that she's applying pressure to this doctor, and potentially quite successfully too.
Yeah, no, because you've got when you're sort of talking about the sort of prisons, I just sort of immediately think of the scene, the tragic scene from like Shawshank Redemption, where Brooks, the sort of old, rather old prisoner, finally gets his release and just cannot adjust to life outside the prison. He grew up his entire life in prison, and he just can't cope with the real world, and he ends up sort of committing suicide. And like you say, the brother is found sort of a peace within the prison, and it's like you say, it's like as an outsider who has no sort of real sort of comprehension of what it would be like to be in the military. Um, an outsider's perspective is like, well, why would you want to go back? You nearly died. You have this chance of a brand new start. Why would you want to go back? But I guess it's like that. It's like they find a family, they find discipline, they find routine and stuff like that. And I mean, it's hinted at quite heavily and stuff like that. That clearly her brother and herself were not happy within the family unit and were looking for an escape. Clearly, the brother found it through crime and then prison, and so she joined the military to escape this her hometown and her family and stuff like that. And I think part of the trouble that she's going through here is clearly the fact that she has been forced to come back to that and confront it as well. And I think there's a definite sort of dark irony, I think, in Brian Tyree Henry's character, sort of, the incident which sparked, where he is now was a car crash, yet he is a mechanic working on cars. He's surrounded every day by the thing which, destroyed his life. I found was really quite interesting and added another layer to those characters, I thought.
Yeah, I thought that it was one of those films. This film has no right to be as good as it is. It feels like it constantly, you read about it on paper, and I think a lot of people could have written, what this film was going to be, but it avoids all of those cliches and things that we expect from films like this. And I was really happy with that. I think it wasn't a film that I loved or thought was definitely one of A24's best films of the year, but it was one that really caught me by surprise, and feels like a long time since I've had that with a film where I've maybe gone in with those preconceptions and they've been turned on their head. And I just thought the performances were excellent, and I've gone back to it kind of several times over the years. That I think with Jennifer Lawrence, she's an actor of sort of two halves, as you mentioned earlier, that we associate her with a lot of these big franchise movies, X-Men, Hunger Games, etc. But I've often found when she's maybe with like a director like a Darren Aronofsky in Mother, I mean, I adored that film. I thought it was fantastic. When she's in the hands of the right director, it makes such a huge difference. I think of films like Crazy, for example, a film that I think is incredibly underrated, features a fantastic performance from Anton Yelchin as well, from Green Room, even things like Don't Look Up. I didn't think it was a great film whatsoever, but I liked her in it quite a bit. And she's definitely appeared in some good films over the years, and I think I want to see her. I think she's been more picky with her films over the past few years, really since kind of that X-Men contract kind of ended. So I'm hoping this is a return to seeing her in good films and original content, because that's what she does best, and that's the actor that I like to think of her as, not sort of phoning it in an X-Men movie.
Yeah, no, because I mean, it's understandable. You start off doing sort of small films. You get stuff like Winter's Bone, like Crazy, and then you're seen as like the next big thing, and you inevitably do get signed into. I guess of a girl that age is you get signed into one of these young adult uh style franchises. So she had Hunger Games, and then they were rebooting the X-Men, so they put her in that. At the same time, she did like a couple of the House at the End of the Street, sort of cheap sort of slasher horror movie and stuff. But at the same time, she was clearly wanting to do more and started, working with people like so you got like American Hustle, David O. Russell. Actually, I mean, it'd be interesting to see if she works with him again, given everything else that's going on there. Um, Passengers, which I think admittedly she said that Adele had tried to warn her against. So always listen to Adele, people, apparently. But then yeah, like you say, it's when she swings for the fences with something like Mother. Um, that's when that's when magic happens, and yeah, because I mean, yeah. So we were looking at sort of like a 2-3 year break there since like the last X-Men movie, which actually itself was delayed quite substantially as well, due to all the terrible things that happened on that film. And I guess she put a definitive sort of basically a massive full stop, but clearly on like I'm sort of done with the sort of franchise movies. I want to do something else, and I think we're going to see more of this style from her in the future. And I think that is where she delivers her best performances. And I think like the strength of this film is it's never like wow or like sensational, but it is a really solid movie. And like if I was to read that description on paper, it's not a film which I would potentially sort of prioritize if like I was only able to afford to go and see one movie at a cinema in a weekend. That's not where I would spend my money, because I feel like I have seen this movie before, and it's going to go down one way. But what I loved about it is the fact every single time it could have gone down that path, it veers down the it doesn't take the cheap and easy road. It takes the difficult one and gives you something surprising. And it's all sort of surrounded by these two wonderful performances and the sort of direction and the script as well. It's never sensationalized. You never get that big moment where she breaks down in frustration or self. You keep expecting that. You keep expecting, I guess, that typical Oscar clip moment, and it never comes, and it's better for that. In fact, it's not until the sort of end where I feel like her Oscar clip for this one would be, I think she's just sensational in the scene where she's talking to her brother in the prison, but it's completely through sign language, but you can still feel every single word that she is essentially delivering via sign language. And it's her performance is, it's as emotive as it would have been if she was speaking out loud. And I think that was where it all sort of came together and everything sort of crystallized for the character. And that was down to the performance of J-Lo in that particular scene for me, I think.
Do you think that people are going to find this movie, in terms of like Apple TV Plus, it's gets more kind of hype for its TV content, for things like For All Mankind, Severance. Do you think people are going to find this film, or is this going to be sort of an A24 film that sort of falls between the cracks for a lot of people?
I feel like it might. I only got Apple TV at the weekend in order to watch this. I got my free trial. I had a few things that I needed to catch up on, so for this podcast, so I got this with Causeway, and for me, it was one of the highlighted films at the start. But like you say, they are sort of prioritizing the TV stuff, or Spirited, starring Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds at the moment. So I mean, I'd be interested to sort of use Apple TV a bit more and see how intuitive it is to what I'm looking for, and how, because I mean we've sort of discussed this, I think, in the past on this podcast, maybe the other one, about Netflix, where they will drop a new film, but you wouldn't know it from the opening sort of window. It can be very difficult to find new films on Netflix, even though they are Netflix original films. They should be throwing that stuff up straight at you as soon as you log in. Those are the things which they've paid hundreds of millions for. They should be prioritizing them over me rewatching Friends or something like that. So I think this is, but hey, I'm about I was about to say it'll be a film which people may struggle to find, but then I've just remembered that last year Apple TV played an absolute blinder during Oscar season and managed to get Coda to a Best Picture win.
God,
So
yeah.
I mean,
Remember
yeah,
Coda?
I mean, yes, remember Coda? Remember that film that won Best Picture? It was like I was like when I saw like someone had like listed like the last top 10 Best Picture, and I was like, oh yeah, Coda won that last year, and then I've not heard anything about that film ever since. I watched it at Sundance, and I was like, yeah, that's a nice film. You know, it's like a classic underdog story. And then it was like, oh, they're pushing that for Best Picture, and then I'm like, oh, it won. Wow, good on them. So don't count Jennifer Lawrence out. I guess there's nothing to say that Apple TV will not be pushing it. And obviously, the more awards acclaim it gets, the more recognition it gets there, then it will drive more people to Apple TV to watch it. And yeah, but I mean, I have been impressed, certainly more than with on the vehicle of Apple TV rather than say Amazon Prime, which is still just one of the most horrendous interfaces I've ever used in my life, and I will probably cancel when I get to the end of that year-long contract, and I'll just stick with Netflix. But Apple TV is impressing me so far, and yeah, we'll have to see what else they've got coming up with. I'm sure it won't be the last A24 film we'll be watching over the next year or so.
No. So next, just in a few days' time, to mark the release of The Whale, we'll be dropping an early episode, as this one is slightly late, with a review of The Whale. This is one I can't wait to finally talk about. You saw it in London. I saw it in London. You saw it in Venice, and we can finally open our mouths about our feelings on it, because I've not read your review to date so far, so I'm excited to finally dive into this one.
Yeah, well, you'll have to wait a couple of days, guys. We're about to talk about it in a couple of minutes.